Welcome to another episode of Give It a Nudge. Today I'm excited because we've got a founder on who's not just built another SaaS business, but he's built a business that is actually helping people live better and healthier, which I'm always excited about. So today we have Timo from Foodini on, and we're going to talk about his app and his business and how it's grown here in Australia and going overseas and how it can benefit all human beings. So welcome, Timo. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. So, and I do love, we have all sorts of different startups on the show, but I do like it when there's kind of a nice, healthy benefit to it rather than just another problem-solving thing. I don't know why. I think that's just a me thing. But why don't you, for the sake of your audience, because you're going to describe it far better than I am, tell us your name and tell us about Foodini. What's your elevator pitch?
All right. My name is Timo Kugler. I'm one of the co-founders and look after the product and part of the tech side of the business. Foodini is a platform that is targeting restaurants and hospitality operators as much as people with all sorts of dietary needs to give them an easier way to navigate the food in their life, especially when it comes to dining out. I have that in my household. I have 2 kids with different food allergies. My wife's a vegetarian.
Gosh.
So finding a restaurant is a bit of a juggling multiple Facebook sites and websites. So when I met my business partner, Dylan McDonald, he's a celiac, and he had this idea already that he wanted to solve this problem for himself. And when we started talking and investigating how big is this problem of dietary needs and kind of the struggle of navigating food around us, really, and turns out it's pretty consistently 33% of the population. So
Is that right?
You're looking at 2.7 billion people around the planet who make their food choice based on either an allergy, a preference, a lifestyle diet, or cultural diet that they want to abide to. And we figured there must be an easier way.
There's got to be. I mean, one of our best friends who we often go to dinner with, his wife has a garlic and onion allergy, which is a shocker, right? If you go into a French restaurant, which we did on Sunday, or somewhere like that, and there's a whole conversation about it, and there's ticking off the menu. You can do this, you can't do this. We could maybe take that out. You're talking for hours. But also, I've got a lot of friends who training for a variety of events, and they want certain, they've got very dietary, strict regimes. I think people have learned that getting the right food into your body when you're training for something has as much impact as the training, right? So you often end up in a restaurant half the time talking about the actual dietary needs of everyone before you even order. So I think it's great. So before we get into that, I wanted to delve into your history, set the scene a little bit as about who you are. There's a lot of Germans in startups. I've noticed this. There's a lot. It seems to be a very cultural thing. And I looked through your profile early this morning, and I saw you had the coolest job ever when you first started in Munich at MTV. But give us a little bit. I mean, how good is that as a young man to work for MTV?
Yeah.
Give us a little bit of, not War and Peace, but a little bit of history as to sort of how you ended up founding this business.
I ended up there by basically finishing school and founding a business because throughout school and especially at the end of high school, a couple of friends and I, we organized every party at our school.
Yep.
We got really good at it. We started organizing parties for lots of other schools.
Yep.
And we said, well, let's start an event business. And we started an event marketing agency. I still have about 10,000 sheets of paper with a letterhead on it. So we went a little bit gung-ho.
Maybe.
But it was a great experience. We ultimately, after 2 years, sold the business. But I was properly focused on things that launched, things that I knew.
Hooked.
And yeah, I was hooked. I really liked that part of a business where not necessarily 2 people in a garage. I've done that as well. But now that when it starts to create a little bit of a shape and traction. So from there, I stayed within corporate and startup land, but always launching new products. And then MTV was one of those where I think I was 23 at the time. I had a lot of bravado, and we had 11 people launching MTV out of London into Germany and Austria and Switzerland.
Yep.
And that was going from 9 people to 90 in 6 months and 13 dogs in the office. So again, it was just fun.
That was a time when dogs were not normally in the office. That's not as normal as back then as it is
now.
in
Germany is actually still quite regular. That depends on what type of office it is.
Yeah.
And then from there, got asked to join a founding team of a tech startup in Munich. We probably were 4 years ahead of the market.
Yeah.
The business needed mobile and smartphones that weren't really around as much as they are today.
Yeah.
But still did a good job, pivoted the business, got acquired in the end, then had a venture into corporate, but still launching new revenue streams and satellite business from within a big media corporation in Munich.
Saw that.
And then I came over here, just traveling, as it happens, met my wife.
That's what happened to me.
Yeah, decided to stay. Worked in media here as well for IPG Media Brands in Sydney.
Yep.
But again, running more corporate satellites and new product lines, and then ultimately ended up with their mobile development and mobile design business. And yeah, from there, at one point we decided for once we're going to make a life choice. We moved up to the Northern Beaches.
Yep.
And I said goodbye to corporate and jumped back into the startup world, mentoring people through the Founder Institute. And that's where I met Dylan. So he kind of came through the Founder Institute program with this idea for a celiac solution. And we connected and we started talking, ended up on the advisory board, then invested in the business early on, then moonlighted as the CEO, helping with the scaling of things.
Yep.
And at one point, my wife said, "You know that you're doing 5 days a week with this guy.
It's not really moonlighting.
You might as well just do it." So we thought, smart idea. And just around the pre-seed round, we said, "Okay, let's do this," and joined forces as co-founders.
Cool.
And then very recently, that's a new story. We brought in a third co-founder in the US as we now expanded the business across to the US. Brought someone on over there with a lot of market experience.
And you've done this a lot in 2.5 years. Foodini's been 2.5 years, is that about right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a fair bit. So you've now got 3 co-founders.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the model, because like you said, your focus was sort of B2B, but it's also B2B to C. How does that sort of work? And you've got an app and so forth. So if someone has an allergy or has difficulty in some of these things we're talking about, my brother's also a celiac as well. So if someone's in that scenario and they're like, "Oh, this is interesting. How does this work?" If they download the app, how's that going to work? Do they have to buy it through a company? Does it have to come from an employer, or does it have to come through hospitality? Give us a sort of how people can interact with you on different levels.
Yeah, sure. So, I'll probably dive into the setup we have in Australia because it's a bit more evolved as the one in the US market. Ultimately, when we started out, you ask yourself, who am I solving this problem for? And we did and still do solve this problem for people with dietary needs.
Yes.
Like my kids, like your brother, like people out there who are on a particular diet. But very quickly in connecting these people with the hospitality industry, and we launched this into kind of the back ends of COVID. So the hospitality industry had a really tough time. The only upside was they had a lot of time to spend with us to kind of talk this through. And we realized there is also a massive operational and commercial and liability problem on their side when it comes, especially to the allergies. But when it comes to revenue, top line, bottom line revenue, also just by catering to dietary needs better than they currently do. And it's not that they don't have the intent. It was really, we don't have the mechanics. We don't have a tool to do it.
Yeah.
So we just put one and one together and said, okay, great. We build a platform, two-sided, that connects both sides of this conversation together. If you're a person with dietary needs, you can go into the app stores, Play Store or the iTunes Store. You download the app. It's free for someone with dietary needs. What is unique with us, we have a full team of dietitians who work inside of our business, informing all of the tech and all of the AI that we're now using. And it allows us to give you over 50 different diet choices or preferences or allergens that you can pick from. So nowhere else can you build a profile that detailed about your diet, and you can always change it as well. So if you go on the summer diet and you want to bring the sugar contents down, you can just adjust it. So you build your profile, and then the app shows you where you can eat. So it helps you here in Australia in particular to find the right restaurants. You fly down to Melbourne, and you might be on a keto diet and you can't eat nuts and you don't like coriander. It's tricky, but with the app, it's pretty simple. It shows you exactly on that profile. Here are the restaurants near you that have the most choice, and then you can look up the menu. It auto customizes to your needs, and it shows you exactly in green at the top. These are the dishes you can order as is. Then it has a section where it shows you these dishes can be modified by the restaurant. We've spoken to them. They've indicated there is alternatives, gluten-free pizza bases or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
and dishes that you shouldn't touch based on your dietary needs. So that is the experience for you. And then
that's interesting, I think, because I think one of the things you touched on there is they can be modified, because any dish can be modified, but it's also the willingness of the restaurants to modify them. Some of them are very accommodating, others not so much, and I guess that depends also on whether they can actually afford to do that from a time perspective, or whether they have the manpower to be able to do that. So I think knowing which ones are probably more open to having that conversation is hugely valuable, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I mean, it helps them to differentiate themselves as well from their competition. And when we started, there were a couple of solutions out there that basically try to make menus more visible, but they just picked up what a menu already had, a V, VEG, and GF. Yeah. No idea what happens in the kitchen, no idea what the food safety protocols are, if they have 1 or 2 deep fries and what goes into what. And that was the challenge that we have to overcome. Like, how do we extract that information for every single restaurant, on every single dish, with every single ingredient? And the numbers get pretty big pretty quickly. Do. But that's what we built over the last 1.5 years. We started building our own AI and GPT engines and large language models to understand that data and have our dietitians train the logic over the top. So now, in a combination of dietitians and really smart tech, we can actually make these distinctions from a restaurant, plus the information that the executive chefs share with us around what's happening.
So how much interaction, so I mean, that's great from a consumer point of view. What if you're a restaurant? How much interaction do they have with you ongoing? Obviously, there's an initial conversation where you can talk about, how willing you are, and all those sorts of things. But is it a continuous consultation happening all the time as things change? Because obviously things change, menus change constantly. How are you doing all that? We're talking about a lot of manpower here. There's a lot of restaurants, and we're just talking Australia when you're all talking about the US. So how's that work? How are you scaling that?
It's not manpower. I think on manpower it would be a problem.
It would be a massive problem.
But on AI power and on the back of tech, and very smart data analytics, it's a different story.
Yeah,
even our dietitian team is still growing. But it's really now in the hands of the tech to deal with the vast amounts of data that you need to go through in order to make this matching process work. For the restaurants, it's very short initially. It's about 20 minutes for a normal menu size. Short. If it's a more engaged menu, or if it's a larger organization with, let's say, 50, 60 outlets, might take a little bit longer. Yeah. And then the restaurant partners can log in to the backend portal. So if they need to update their menu, they just upload a new menu. Right. The new tech can read it, understand what has changed, and make adjustments accordingly. If there's anything the tech is unsure about, so if it goes under 99.2% certainty, it flags it to the dietitians to make sure. And we operate it in the kind of worst case scenario as a default. Yeah. And then ease into what's actually in the dish. So we make as sure as we can. There's always a chance of human error. Of course. But we take as much of it as we can out of the equation. Yeah,
you can go into a restaurant and ask for something to be done, and there's a huge chance of human error. Happens all the time. So
actually, it's a stat from last year in the US. There was a big study that was run in restaurants, and the result was 53% of allergy incidents that happen in a restaurant happen after the waitstaff has been informed of the allergy. So that communication piece from the waitstaff to the kitchen.
53, did you say?
More than half.
That's terrible.
Yeah, it is.
That's an awful stat.
Which is also not a bad reason for us to go to the US and help fix that.
And I guess, you touched on it earlier, you mentioned the word liability. I don't know whether there is liability here in Australia. Not that I'm aware of, but is there in the US? Everyone seems to be liable for everything. Everyone's suing everyone. Is that a reality for them there?
It is. It's similar here. My co-founder is a lawyer by trade. So before we had wireframes, we had disclaimers and T's and C's.
Awesome.
So obviously we disclaim back to the consumer that if they do have a severe allergy in particular, that's where it becomes challenging. Yeah. It is mandated that they let the restaurant know, and therefore they put it on the restaurant. Yeah. And we also work with our restaurants to understand that you need to update the information that we're aware of. If you make changes that we don't know, we can't reflect them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's ultimately we never create a zero risk environment. That's unrealistic, but we mitigate more than any other solution that's out there from anything from happening.
So I didn't realize there would actually be a liability issue around that. I mean, and you're talking about more than half getting it wrong. That's a big business of liability.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we have a lot of conversation with insurance companies, health insurers, but also the bigger liability insurers, because quite a lot of them did the math on what the policy need to cost in order to cover the increasing risk, because the prevalence and the complexity of dietary needs is rising very quickly. And if you go younger and younger, like if you jump 10, 15 years back in age, it rises exponentially. So we haven't even seen the top of that wave yet.
Now, do you think, because there's a lot of theories on this, are we becoming, as a human race, are we becoming more allergic to things, or are we just capable of measuring it, whereas we weren't in the past? I've always wondered, because obviously when I was at school, there were very few kids that had any allergies. There was always the odd one with the peanut one that was very, very severe, but no one else had allergies. No one else talked about it. But I think that's because we were unaware. Now it seems that there's a lot of children. I mean, I remember, my children are teenagers now, but I remember the early years of parties were an absolute nightmare in terms of the amount of children turning up with allergies. And you're like, oh my God, I don't want to even have this party. But I always wondered, is it just that we're aware and that they were always there, or do you think it's actually on the increase?
It's both. So we have plenty of studies that we went through over the last couple of years here in the US with the health authorities. There is a rising prevalence and there is a rising level of allergens that people are now reacting allergic to. And there's different theories as to why that is, from environmental influences, the more commoditized food that we eat and the ingredients in that can contribute to that. But on the other hand, we also deliberately trying to diagnose earlier, especially with kids.
Yeah.
There is just now standard tests that weren't there 30 years ago. But when we speak, we're partnered with Celiac Australia as one of the organizations that we kind of tied knots with very early on. And they will tell you that 80% of the celiacs in Australia are still undiagnosed. So again, there is still a fair big amount of work that needs to be done in that space.
Yeah. My brother found out at 44.
Yeah,
I mean, that's pretty late in life.
But it's very common.
Yeah.
It's very common.
It's interesting, isn't it? And so you also touched on hospitality, which is another sort of part to the piece. How are you working with hospitalities? And are you talking about event providers, or are you talking about caterers, or all of the above?
When you build a business like this and you look at, okay, there's 2.7 billion people with the problem, and there's
That's a lot of people.
$4 trillion hospitality and food industry. Like, where are you gonna start making the connections?
Pull the line, yeah.
So we obviously, as a startup that grows and scales, you need to be very focused.
Yes.
And we identified restaurants and that sector of hospitality as a good starting point.
Probably the biggest, most varied part, right?
Yeah, but I mean, if you talk to our users, they have questions all day about when can I use it at Woolies? When can I use it here? When can I use it at the footy stadium? So they have questions all about, because ultimately it's a tool that helps them to navigate food. And we don't only eat food in restaurants.
No.
And you want to have that solution wherever. Like if you...
Airplanes.
Yeah, airplanes, or we already had certain conversations. If you log on to your well-known food meal prep delivery boxes, I had an issue with that, because with my family background, ordering a box where every recipe and every ingredient and every recipe works,
like your HelloFresh kind of things,
was just a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
So using it there is yet another iteration of it.
And that's such a big industry now as well, that food prep business.
So, but we started with restaurants. We're still very focused on that piece at the moment. It's predominantly all we do in the US right now is going through that sector. And it has a number of reasons. One is, after COVID, the entire industry is still catching up with staffing and with training of that staff and the experience and expertise levels around dietary needs. So having a tool in the hands of the waitstaff and or the guest that takes that 5-minute back and forth and let me go to the kitchen and ask the chef out of the equation is operationally for them really helpful.
Absolutely.
It provides a better guest experience, because you don't really want to share your dietary needs or allergies when you're out with colleagues or on a date or whatever it might be. And ultimately, what's really interesting for them, especially in the current climate, is we capture a lot of data around that. So we can go back to them after a month is up and say, hey, out of the 800 people or 1,000 people that used it over the last month in your environment, here's the dietary cohort breakdown. And you actually have 27% of your guests identify with a vegetarian profile.
Yeah.
Your menu, however, doesn't really reflect that.
That's
and
great.
you might be leaving money on the table. And if you change it, which our AI and the dietitians can make these recommendations to say, swap out this ingredient here and there, and then you offer a bigger range for bigger dietary cohorts.
I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah,
they would never collect data. I mean, restaurants are not great at collecting data, right? So to be able to have that data provided, and I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah, the bigger ones are good at it, the really well organized ones.
Yeah.
And then the platforms that are in between. So our friends at Uber Eats or DoorDash or Menulog or OpenTable, they're also getting really good at that.
Yeah, they would do.
And we're helping to supply that component of the diner's profile.
Now you've got a new app, right, coming out?
Yeah,
I looked at your app, and it's really easy to use. Like I found the user experience really pleasant.
That's good to hear.
But now you're changing it, so I hope you're making it better.
We're improving it. We're improving it. It's, you know what, when you build tech, and we had this app now out for a year and a half here in Australia.
Yep.
And it's gone. We have 80,000 users. They provide us a lot of feedback on that, and there's some really good ideas in there. And also we have in isolation rebuilt the entire backend of the technology. We've built way more AI components in it quicker than we thought.
Yep.
And now we're just connecting all of this. So the experience is going to be as easy.
Even more seamless.
But there's also going to be really interesting features coming in.
Okay, cool. I mean, I don't have any allergies to anything. So I found it quite interesting looking through it because it's not something I ever have to think about. I'm very lucky in that none of my immediate family has any allergies. In fact, that's an interesting question. Actually, I hadn't thought about that. My children had allergies when they were younger, but they've grown out of them, so to speak, is what people say, which is apparently also quite common, which I find a bizarre thing. But we don't have any now, which is nice. But it's funny how you grow out of them. I don't. That's
it's just you build better sensibilities for them. You can do this deliberately. So even if you have a food allergy, let's say egg or whatever, you can expose yourself over a period of time to minute components of it that your body can handle and build up more
a bit like having a jab of a vaccine.
Yeah.
So my friend developed the garlic and onion one, having never had any when she was probably in her 30s, had a really bad experience with I think it was sushi or Japanese or something like that. Got really quite ill. And then the effect of that was that she developed this garlic and onion allergy, which is I've never really understood that either. There was nothing there before.
It's in the top 10.
Oh, okay. There you go. See, I literally know nothing about this.
The thing is, going into this, I had no clue about it because personally, I'm like you. I'm really, unless I make a deliberate choice, I can eat anything. My kids can't, and my wife is vegetarian.
Yeah.
But having my head of dietetics sitting across from me at the desk, I learn new things every day. Like almost 3 years in, and
what's the most surprising thing? What's the thing that you were like, oh my god, really?
Well, it's more so coming from the user base where they point out, can I please specifically deselect blackberries or strawberries or things like mango? Who's allergic to mangoes and why?
Because, I love mangoes.
Yeah, but going through this, we have now 1,200 individual ingredients in the backend. That's one thing that you can do with the new app. At the moment, you have 50 different things you can choose from.
1,200, that's a lot.
You will have the option.
You know what? The day you launch it, someone will ask you for one that's not in there. I guarantee.
Please do so. I mean, it's also often that if there's baseline ingredients, which is there's a list from the Australian Food and Food Safety Authority that you can look up. But obviously, there's ingredients imported from all over the world that are not in this list.
It's endless.
It
really is. And so you're going to the US. So let's talk about that. So obviously, huge market. Probably a little more advanced around this than Australia. Would that be right? I feel like it would be. I don't know.
No, you're on it. But when we started this idea, I mean, very early in the piece, probably 5 months into even talking about this business, we knew that this is going to be built for the US.
Yeah.
For reasons of scale, but also for reasons of the hospitality industry. Like there's about 51,000 restaurants in Australia. There's over 1 million in the US.
Wow.
So it's a very different scale to play with. And depending on where you are in the US, if you go to California, preferences are treated like allergies. So people wouldn't fall off the chair if they eat the wrong thing, but their behavior is exactly the same. And if you're in LA, and we've been over there, and Dylan in particular, my business partner, he had trips. If you order off the menu in LA, just kind of put it a little bit over the top, and you're the one ordering as is without making any changes, people will look at you like, what's your deal?
What's with him?
Like no modifications. And that's obviously that's not right. It's not true everywhere, but it's.
Well, yeah, I mean, LA makes sense, but I still find that would be to be the exception for just. Well, I remember that. Last time I went to LA, I don't remember making any changes to any of my menu items.
Well, look around the table. What
I was with a bunch of Australians. Thank God.
That's probably okay. But I think the first thing we learned in then investigating this idea, going to the US always sounds fun, and that's what you want to do. But everyone warned us immediately, like, oh, guys.
It's a big place.
It's a big place. Be careful. Many have tried, many have failed. So what was super helpful is we went through the Australian government, the Austrade program, the landing pad in San Francisco. So we burned a lot of midnight oil doing all of the workshops and getting prepared they have fantastic people over there helping us to understand, listen, it's actually about 35 markets, not one.
Yes.
So you need to start segmenting this out, East Coast, West Coast, and then
it's almost like taking Europe as a country.
Yeah, and then you have the major cities, which, I mean, LA County has 20 million people? That's almost, 23, that's almost Australia.
Yeah.
So we literally started here going, okay, we started in Sydney, then we did parts of Melbourne, then we're like, okay, we need to get better at launching. So we did Brisbane and Adelaide in one go, and we put pressure on the team there. We put the pressure on, but we learned from it, and we got better at doing bigger launches, and that prepared us to go and pick particular markets in the US. So we're not going to say, hey, America, here we are. It's going to be very much city by city and market by market.
And you've launched already, right?
Yes. So we already have a bit over 100 restaurants using the tech over there, which very initially we picked a couple of Aussies, like Bluestone Lane Cafes, Nick Stone, ex-AFL player, very successful over there with his idea of the Aussie breakfast and Aussie cafe. That helped us to kind of test it, put it in front of US consumers, because you think, well, it's going to be the same, right?
It's never the same.
It's never the same.
I mean, even Brisbane's different to Sydney to some degree, so definitely it's going to be different.
Yeah, it's but if you're an entrepreneur, you always have to say, oh, how hard can it be?
Well, you have to say that, otherwise you wouldn't do anything.
Yeah, and then you realize, oh man, it's really not
so
that easy. But it's great because Austrade connected us into a really good network over there, also of Aussie founders in the US and sharing war stories. And so what I said is, at one point we had Erica Enderman on our advisory board for over a year. Mm-hmm. And she's done this for 15 years for massive food tech and hospitality tech startups in the US. One all the way to IPO, the others Series D capital raise. Yeah. And it just collided in a way that she was thinking about, maybe for once I should do my own thing. And she said, listen, the business I would want to build right now, because it's the most needed, is the business you're building. And we said, say no more. Why don't we find a way? And ultimately, here we are as 3 co-founders. And
how exciting!
Yeah, we couldn't be happier to.
I mean, that's awesome to have someone like that come on into a market that they already know, who wants to build your business. That's just amazing. Yeah. And so, how long have you been? And is there anyone doing anything like that there, or are you? I mean, there may be, but is there anyone of note?
Well, there's a couple popping up here and there. There's probably 1 or 2 where I'd say, okay, that's close enough of a very, very similar competitor. But I said from the get-go, if you start a business, it always feels awkward if all of a sudden there's someone else doing exactly what you're doing.
It's awful. It's the worst thing in the world. You feel like you've gone, how does that happen? It was my idea.
But if you don't have competition, you don't have a market.
Well, that's true.
If you're the only one doing it after 2 years, you should be concerned. At least that's my...
Unless you're killing it, right? Unless you're killing it. But and then there would be someone else, of course.
And I mean, we hear that all the time when we fundraise, like, oh, why wouldn't DoorDash build this? Or why wouldn't Google build it? Yeah. And it's, at the moment, I mean, it doesn't matter which industry, this question, every tech entrepreneur gets like, why is Google not just building this?
Well, Google can't build everything. And that's a simple answer. Yeah. But they may do one day. Well, hopefully they'll just buy you.
And it's if you look at the bigger platforms, there's one that we working with in the US called Olo. So Toast is a hospitality tech platform most people know. They're fairly big in terms of the SMB market. Olo is the enterprise equivalent. Right. So they have the Chipotles and the big hospitality groups on their platform. And they have 300 different tech integrations of different apps and different solutions.
That's a lot.
And they've given you the answer 300 times. Like we can't build all of this. There's smart teams out there building this.
Yeah.
And even talking to companies like DoorDash, they're very aware of the problem. That's not the issue, but they also have other objectives and priorities, and they often look outside. And yeah, good for us. So there is competition growing, which I welcome.
Means you're going down the right track.
But and it also helps because we don't have to use all of our marketing dollars to educate all of the consumers. If we get some help from others,
and it probably
singing
helps
from the same songbook,
well.
that also helps.
Would it help fundraising? Because I think, I don't know where you are in your fundraising journey. We can talk about that now. But when you are fundraising, if no one's done something before, there's always a little bit of reluctance from risk averse.
Yep.
Although they are a lot more, I guess, open to new ideas in the States. When I'm assuming that you're raised there, now you're going there because it's going to be easier.
Let's put it that way. We didn't make it necessarily easy for us to jump market, because then all of a sudden you're in the US, you're talking more to US investors, and they love to look at their own market traction. It's like, what have you done in America? What have you done in the US? Like, well, we're very successful in Australia. And they're like, good for you, but what have you done here? And so that took a while to calibrate. And then to your point, we also learned like, what is the right type of investor? There are investors, and I understand why, because the market is not the funniest right now. There's investors who want to repeat what has been done before.
Okay.
They want to see the blueprint of another company who's successfully done this and figure out like, which market are you going to do this in? When we came along, you first make people aware of how big is this problem. And then they investigate, they come back and say, actually, it is a big problem. It's like, yeah. And then you convince them that there is a solution that no one else has found before, which is also another trick you need to do.
Yep.
And then you slowly but surely you get to the investors that also connect passionately with the problem. And you know what? The 33% do help, because in a third of the conversations, by sheer statistics, someone is in the room saying, my wife is this, or I'm that, or my daughter has this. And you, to your point initially, when you said it's always nice if you have something that fundamentally helps people and people can emotionally connect to something, it does help.
Oh, it does. I think any investor group, if they can see it solving a problem they have themselves, of course, it's gonna raise that interest level just that little bit more.
Yeah.
And so, how's that going? Are you fundraising at the moment? Are you planning on fundraising?
We're planning to close this round. So we've been going for a little while, a bit longer than we thought.
And what are you, seed?
Yeah. So we're raising a seed round at the moment. I have to say the Australian environment is very friendly if you're an early startup.
It is.
The government grants and the R&D programs and everything that you can participate in here. So it allows you to stretch a pre-seed round for a bit.
Yep.
But then you need to go out and raise more capital. So we've done this. We had a lot of our initial investors come back into the round, and we have some European syndicates and investors. So we're not in Europe, but they got the point. Yeah. It's also because in the UK and in Germany and other markets, it's now mandated by the legislation that you have to flag 16 different allergens on your menu. And it becomes really cumbersome if every dish needs to have 16 tags on them and you need to try and read through them. But there were too many fatalities in that space. And the UK put out a law to say that's what you need to do. And we're getting quicker to adopting similar practices. The US in certain markets do that as well. So that also is a tailwind that helps us, that even the Biden administration now has a new program out that targets that particular topic.
Well, the world's going the right way for you. There's no question. In terms of legislation and so forth, that's awesome. Yeah. And I'm guessing you're going to be growing.
That's what you got to do, right?
That's what you got to do.
When you're a startup, you have to grow, you have to scale. Yes. So in all parts of the business, we're growing. We're growing on the tech side. We're growing on the dietitian side still. Go-to-market teams, support functions, customer success, you name it.
So let's talk about that. If someone's and it'll often be people with the very problem, and they're going, I want to work for this business. I love the sound of what he's saying. I love where they're going. In terms of working at Foodini, why would someone come and work at Foodini? What's it like? Because no one can describe it better than yourself. So I always like to put this on the record so that people can hear it.
Yeah, it's usually I would push my team into that question.
No,
say,
I got you. There's no one else here.
It's ultimately also what gets me out of bed in the morning. And I've done this a couple of times, and I've been in corporate environments, and that wasn't all bad. But if you know you're working on a problem that fundamentally helps people live a better life. And we've seen this firsthand. We've been to so many consumer shows like the Celiac Expo or the Vegan Expo, and people come up and hug us and say, for the first time in 7 years, I could go out and have a date with my partner because it's been such a hassle and we could never go out because there's so many food allergies. And now we could actually find a restaurant, and it was great.
That's awesome.
And you get that feedback, and the last 2 weeks of burning the midnight oil and sleeping for 4 hours is gone.
Yeah, I can well believe that.
Although that's the founder life, so we don't expect that of our team to kind of be in the office at 4:00 in the morning.
Just to be clear.
But I mean, they're very passionate, all of them, and they also put in what needs to happen. We're here in the building at Fishburners in Sydney at the Startup Hub. It's a great space to start with to work. It's very collaborative with all of the other startups. Lots of things happening all the time. We have a really good culture in the team. We do a lot of outings together. Obviously, if you're in hospitality, it's not that hard to say we need to have a work meeting at this restaurant and check out what they're really all about. So that happens a fair bit as well. If someone wants to work for us, someone feels like that's my passion project and I want to make a difference there, come and talk to us. Like, to your point, we're growing, not always at the very precise rate, but if I'm aware of people with talent and skills and passion and they want to get involved, we will find a way to make that happen.
We have seen since COVID was a changer in so many ways in terms of people and how they behave and all sorts of different things. But the number one thing we see as a recruitment business is when people are looking for a change, they want to do something that has some meaning to them in some way. And whether that's impacting other people through, helping them be able to, what you just said, help them actually be able to go out and live the lives they want to, or whether it's something that impacts themselves or someone they know, like 33%, everyone knows someone who's got some allergy. And having a business that is doing something is almost at top of the list. I think if you go back pre-COVID, everyone was always, they wanted the next role was always about getting to the next role. So it's like, what am I going to learn there? How is that going to take me? That's how the whole world thought. Now it's about how can I help the world? It really has changed the whole sort of psyche of everyone. It's been fascinating to watch in terms of what we do. So you're in a good place there, but it's definitely up there in the top 3 things that most people are looking for these days. So.
Yeah, and the good thing is with it, and that's not exclusive to us. We bring a fair amount of interns through as well. We'll just give them. I'm just tomorrow going to catch up with Western Sydney University as well. We're helping their entrepreneur program, allowing them to come in and do field research, what is it really to work in a startup and what's happening. So to kind of give back in that way, but also see people first year of university coming in and starting to find their footing and taking responsibility for certain projects and delivering a great job and then being proud about themselves. It's fun. I mean, I've done this a fair bit throughout my career, but it never gets old. And in a startup environment, it's just there is not that much hierarchy. It's like every hand on deck, and you might actually end up with a project that's way above your pay grade, but you get the support you need, but you can actually put your teeth in it and see how it feels. I think that makes part of it.
It's an extreme learning scenario, a startup. That's how I try to explain it to people.
Yeah, that's...
Don't come in thinking you know anything, because no one knows anything.
Yeah,
everyone's learning.
In terms of the learning experience, you should wear Red Bull gear, because it's that extreme.
That's a good analogy. I like that. Look, Timo, thank you so much for coming on. I really wish you the best in the US. I know how difficult that can be, but I think, look, with the co-founder you just brought on, it's going to make life a lot, well, maybe not a lot easier, but a lot simpler. I love what you're doing. It's much needed. It seems to be getting worse. We will have to get you back on in a couple of years. We've started doing this a lot more now, getting old guests to come back on. So I'll be keen to hear how you've dominated in the US. You might even have to fly back over. Who knows? You might have moved there by then to do our next episode.
Well, the thing is, we just shipped Dylan to the US, which he's a US citizen by birth, so that helped. We have 2 of the co-founders in the US now, and we're hiring a team over there as well. So yeah, but I'm keen to go as well. Just spend some time over there.
Absolutely. Well, look, thank you for coming on, and we look forward to seeing how it goes.
Thanks for having me. That was fun.
Thanks for watching today, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next week.